Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Welcome to Bow and Tao. Tonight we'll be interviewing Todd Perry and discussing Taoism.
How are you doing, my
Hello.
good sir?
Oh, hello. Hi. Yes, I'm doing great. It's really nice to meet you guys today.
Yeah. So, for the audience, tell us, what do you do? I know you run a podcast, with, I believe it's I believe it's a Taoist professor.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what
Exactly.
go with your background?
Yeah. So we have a podcast called "What's This Tao All About?" We started 5 years ago, and it's basically a conversation between myself, who I'm a writer. I'm like a journalist in my normal career, and it's about conversations on Taoism and how it applies to life in a really practical, lighthearted kind of way. And my partner, so right now you're talking to Robin. My partner is Batman here. I'm Todd, and he's Dr. Carl Totten. But Dr. Carl Totten is a member of the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. He runs his own kung fu studio. He's a doctor of psychology. Um, he's really and he's a Taoist priest. He's really one of the most incredible men. So to backtrack a little bit, I have a background in radio. I worked in talk radio in Los Angeles, kind of behind the scenes, and did a little bit of on mic work in San Diego. And then eventually, I've done a bunch of podcast stuff, and in about 5 years ago, I'd already always like studied Taoism and read a lot of books on it, and took classes with a guy named Derek Lin, who's written one of the most popular translations of the Tao Te Ching. So I had some background in it. And I went to look for a podcast on the topic, and honestly, I couldn't find anything that was really worth digging into. There wasn't that much stuff out there. So I just happened to find Dr. Carl Totten, and we hit it off. And so far, we've done like 75 episodes. The show's been way more successful than I ever imagined. We have like 600,000 downloads. So yeah, and it's just us exploring the ideas of Taoism, and it's kind of like I interview him to learn from the master, really. So it's been an incredibly valuable experience for me to do the show, and we've attracted like a really passionate following. So it's been really exciting.
Yeah. I've always found that, at least in Western society as of recent, there has become a spike in interest when it comes to Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, for the audience, like I remember I was watching one of your recent podcasts, and you had said like how the Tao is like a theory of everything before there was a theory of everything.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Um,
you got to
yeah.
go into that a bit.
Yeah. I think you kind of have to start at the onset of kind of when Taoism kind of came into to be a philosophy, and it goes back to in China they had a thing called the Warring States period, and this was when China was in disarray because what was kind of a unified country had been broken apart by different kind of warring factions. Just to do a real basic idea of it. So what happened was because of this, the rulers in China decided to do like, let's make China great again, and let's get like all these different minds from around. Let's get like scholars. Let's get um, academics. Let's get philosophers. Let's get like all the kind of best minds in China to come together to figure out how people should behave, how to best run a country, how to live morally, and to kind of put the whole thing back together. So you came up with two basic ideas that came out of that. And one was Taoism and one was Confucianism. So there was this whole thing that was called the Hundred Schools movement, where all these people were trying to come up with the best ways to live for all different types of every facet of life. So the school of the Tao emerged, and Confucianism emerged. Now, the difference between the two was that Confucianism is basically looking at the world and creating moral precepts and rules and hierarchies in order to best organize the world. So you can, be happy, healthy, have a functioning society. Everybody knows what to do, etc. And also there's a politics involved with that. And then Taoism became kind of like the anti-Confucian idea, because Taoism said we don't need to build these hierarchies. There's already a way that things move. There's a way of the seasons. There's a way of the universe. And if we understand the way the universe works, as humans, we can work in alignment with this power that already exists. They call the Tao. And then if we work with that power, everything we'll do will be successful. We don't have to interfere like the Confucians or like authoritarians want to do in life. We can let things run in their own natural way. So basically, we're using a Taoist kind of concept is to use the house rules that were already there before humanity, and to have the best outcomes in what they're trying to do in life, to live happily, to not interfere with other beings, and just kind of get back to a natural state of naturalness. So, and I know that's a very long explanation for your question, but and so the question was the theory of everything. So the way that the universe works, which they call the Tao, is kind of this theory of everything, where by studying, observing, participating, getting out of your own head, you can actually get into this space to better understand the way everything works around you. And once you understand that, you'll kind of come up with the answers for everything around you, how to behave, how to understand how other things are moving, and how to understand how everything kind of fits together. Does that make sense?
So when you say the Tao is basically the Oriental version of the Logos?
Well, I would not say that I know enough about basic kind of Hellenistic philosophy to answer that and not sound like a moron. But well, it's kind of like the logo. That would be like the logic behind everything, right?
I kind of bring this up because it sounds similar, and in Chinese translations of the Bible, they say in John 1, in the beginning there's the Tao, and the Tao became flesh. Kind of in the original Greek, it was in the beginning there was the Logos, and the Logos became flesh, and became Jesus.
Yeah, I could say. Well, if you look at, I believe it's like I'll have my little book here, the chapter of the Tao Te Ching. So basically, I think it's the second chapter here. But basically, what happens is in Taoism, the idea is that everything is a unity, and then through our own concept, through our own kind of human minds, we break up everything into individual items when really they're all just working together as one.
And
right?
before we go further, what's the difference between Tao and Tao for the audience?
Yeah, Tao is just, I mean, like Tao. I think it's because most people read it, so they just think it's Tao, but actually it's pronounced Tao. Yeah, and so some people say Tao, some people say Tao. Doesn't really matter.
We say bow and towel.
Bow and Tao. What would the bow be in reference to?
Oh, it's a joke because of this the Skype group name I came up with.
Oh, okay. No, that works. That's totally fine. I thought maybe that was some deeper thing going on in the show with the bow that I didn't know about.
No, I mean, it was just a funny thing. I mainly know my knowledge about Taoism comes primarily through my own study into virtue ethics, because in order to study virtue ethics, you have to study Aristotle, and you can't really study Aristotle without at least 5 or 6 scholars saying how similar it is to Confucianism. And once you go into Confucianism, you necessarily get to Taoism.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's sort of like, that's where my background really comes with it, in knowing the differences between the stuff.
And for most Westerners, Taoism seems more complicated than it actually is. So we can go into the various beliefs and philosophies around it. But first off, there's a misconception that many people have that there's a yin yang, which some people would say that I think it's yang, which is the positive, and yin's the negative. If I remember, light and darkness. One represents God, and the other one represents Satan. Could you clarify on that?
I don't think there's no God in Taoism or Satan, so I don't think that would apply to the Taoist concept of the universe because it's kind of a naturalistic, non-authoritarian view of things. Um, the Tao kind of in Taoism they tend to believe in a what I call an indifferent universe where it says in there that the universe and the kind of what they call the heavens, kind of the ether, treats men like straw dogs, which is like nothing. The
Yeah,
universe doesn't
where
care
they
about humanity or not. So I wouldn't go with the God Satan thing
right
because
where they get that idea is that one represents positive and good, and the other one represents negation and evil and darkness against the light.
yeah, I think it's everything. I mean, it's kind of everything's opposite is the side of the same whole. So you'd have like light and dark taken in both together are the Tao, and both together are necessary. Like you have there's a little bit of white inside the black and a little bit of black inside of the white, and
Yeah.
that's about balance, and that one thing tempers the other. Like you can't have complete peace without war, without an element or threat of war at some point, or you can't have, war without wanting to get to peace. Nothing can exist without the opposite, but they build to create a whole. And again, it's with our human minds that we tend to break things up into different categories.
And you say there's no God or anything in Taoism, or does it ignore it or just deny the existence? Because there's some people who believe that there are these certain individuals that became deities. There's a certain trio of divinities that they worship, and then there's some that have deified Confucius and Lao Tzu and others.
Oh yeah, well it's a little different. So I guess to back things up a bit, in Taoism called like religious Taoism, and then there's philosophical Taoism. So philosophical Taoism is what I talk on the show with my buddy Dr. Carl Totten, and we talk about like the Tao Te Ching, which is the works of Lao Tzu, kind of like the original kind of founding document, and then a book called the Chuang-Tzu, which is about a guy named Chuang-Tzu who came 250 years later. Now, also there was a flavor of Taoism which developed as kind of like a ritualistic folk religion, which was different based on different areas of China, like almost like you'd have different ways people would practice Christianity in America. So Taoism, there's kind of two ways. There's the philosophical, and then there's the religious. And in the religious form of that, they have multiple deities. They have different types of rituals, and yeah, and it's more of a practicing religion, which I don't know much about that honestly. We keep to the philosophical Taoism, because that has a lot to do with kind of folk religion that's kind of just kind of indigenous to China.
I find it interesting, how you said that your co-host is actually, I believe you said a priest of it.
Yeah, the Taoist priest is like what they would use for somebody who is, gone through kind of the lineage of understanding and Taoism and studied under a master and things like that. They have a thing that's like a priesthood thing.
Mm.
And they have abbots and priests, and it's a really decentralized type of thing. It's not like a whole like organization you'd have like
Not like in
the
the
Catholic
Catholic
Church.
Church. Yeah.
No, it's
So,
not that. I think it's more of an unofficial type of title than there's one there's a pope in China that is controlling all this, because Taoism is much into decentralization and wouldn't like that type of hierarchy to begin with.
that's interesting. Yeah, I did hear that. I hear that Taoism is very popular in places like Japan, for example. Although I think that might be more the religious Taoism than the philosophical Taoism.
Sort of
Yeah,
a,
I think so. I think yeah.
go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, go. Yeah, I agree with you. I believe that that's kind of the roots of that is in the religious Taoism versus um, just kind of the stuff based on the basic text.
Yeah. So I believe, since I'm all about the ethics, because that's how I really got into this got into the Eastern philosophies to begin with is going into ethics.
Yeah.
Um, I believe, in Taoism, I mean, yeah, Taoism, that I believe that they do put like an emphasis on family to an extent, but not, I believe, as much as Confucianism does.
Oh, I'm sorry, you broke up right there.
Oh, sorry. I said I believe in Taoism. They like some of the ethics of it go into. It does put an emphasis on family, but I don't think to the extent that uh, that Confucianism did in terms of
Cor-
ethics.
Correct. Yeah, there's a part in the Tao Te Ching that say when the Tao is understood, then filial piety goes away, and the idea of filial, it's a weird word. Piety is that like you know the husband does this, the wife does this, the oldest kid does this person does this, the uncle does this, and there's kind of a set rule, like a nuclear, really hard set nuclear family rule. And the Taoist idea on that was like if everybody understands the Tao and is acting in this natural way, then people can divvy up their jobs and responsibilities based on what they're good at and based on what works best for that unit versus having hard set rules that come from above or on top or a cop up the street telling you how to run your family.
So yeah,
And
so
so,
that would be yeah, so that would be more like Confucianism. Like if we're going to give like American or Western flavor to it, Confucianism would seem to be the more um, conservative of the two, while the Taoism would be more liberal leaning of the bunch. If we're talking
yeah,
like
I think
strict
I
nuclear
think so.
family, if
Yeah,
we're just talking like
I think
with
you'd be a
these,
little bit more leave it to Beaver.
Yeah,
yeah,
not like
You'd be
those.
more, yeah.
uh,
Was
yeah, it'd
that?
be more like you said, leave it to Beaver.
Yeah, you would be a little bit more leave it to Beaver, unless within the Taoist family it was natural for the father to be the authoritarian and the mother to be demure to him, and that just shook out naturally,
Mhm.
you know.
I've always found it. What's very interesting looking into contemporary religions is, while these are places that never interact with each other to some times, but yet you notice a similar pattern that goes along with it.
Uh-huh.
Like, for example, like yeah, you said with the family units, you tend to find that sort of style just about everywhere. uh,
Yeah.
where you'll find this, what we would consider a traditional masculine role. You'll find that, like how you said, in Taoism, and you'll find, when you can go over to the Middle East and you can go over Islamic tradition, you find that similar stuff. And you can say that a lot of these places, they've never interacted with each other, but yet there's still this division of labor that seems to bear out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in Taoism they say know the masculine but keep to the feminine. So they would say to that masculine head of the household or whatever to be understanding of the values of the feminine. Like again, because we have yin and yang, we know these things work well together. And so they would say yes, Ward Cleaver. Also understand the value in yourself of being sensitive or things that we would associate as yin values,
Mhm.
being receptive, things like that.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I believe, since the last the last Eastern philosophy we got into, or we call it an Eastern religion here,
Mm-hmm.
but, was we talked about, I believe I showed you the video of our podcast that we had with a
The
practicing
Buddhists.
Buddhist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was very interesting. I do know that, like, I find with many religious beliefs or philosophies that they do tend to mingle together. Um,
Yeah, it's like a lot of good, yeah, like there's a lot of good ideas that people realize are good universally, and they accept them.
Yeah,
yeah,
in Japan, Shinto and Buddhism worked rather well for centuries certain until certain ruling families decided it wasn't okay, and then it was okay again, and then it's now okay again, and on and on.
Well,
Yeah,
that's basically politics 101 for you.
yeah, and I think the Taoists would dissuade having leaders that would dictate religion to people or dictate their values. They wouldn't want that. There's a lot of
Mhm.
kind of powerful political aspects, like in Taoism and the Tao Te Ching. A good 20% of the book is dedicated to leaders and the politics. So it's funny, like on my podcast, we talk about on What's This Tao All About. We talk about the politics of Lao Tzu, specifically Lao Tzu, the writer of the Tao Te Ching, the kind of for the kind of the Bible of Taoism, and it gets into politics. So we get to eventually field the occasional angry email from, "Why are you talking about politics?" So it's like, well, read the book. It's in the book,
It's a political book.
It is. It is a political book. It's kind of it's everything, and they understood, especially at that time during the Warring States period, the importance of how should our leaders interact with us, and what role should they have in our lives, and what role shouldn't they?
And
Yeah.
there's speaking of this this syncretism. There's also that also happened in Japan during the 10th century, where there's this certain Shinto-based Taoism advocated by these samurai, Abe no Same and Kamo no Yasuni.
Hmm.
I forgot the name of this religion, but it's Tao mixed with Shinto philosophy.
Oh, I haven't ran across that, but
Mhm.
anything that is, I'm writing this down right now as a note. Anything that's samurais and Taoism sounds like a lot of fun to read
I'm
about
going
and
by
get
memory.
into.
I'm going by memory. I'm
Yeah,
butchering their names.
good.
Well,
No, that's fine. That's fine.
yeah. I mean, I've always found it interesting looking into the culture of the Eastern religions, especially to find out ways of not just where they differ with Western philosophies, but also to find out where there are similarities.
Oh yeah.
Um, that's always an interesting thing. Like when I read into Confucianism and inevitably into Taoism from that, you know, I did find out that they do place an emphasis on virtues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
definitely. The Tao Te Ching is basically called the Way and its power. It's also like a third of it. It's like the Way and its power. And it's like the virtue day. It means virtue in action. So a whole bunch of it is like, here's the Tao. Here's what you should be working towards understanding. The is here's how you put it into action in your life. And
mhm.
then the rest of the book is kind of the social aspects, laws and war.
And tell the
I
dear
think
audience about the founder of Taoism.
Uh, Basically, the story is, and many believe it to be apocryphal, that Lao Tzu, who was the alleged author of the Tao Te Ching, may not have even existed. And it doesn't really matter because it's like the words and the point of it is what matters, not the myth created around him. Like in religious Taoism, they venerate him like a deity and all that. But with the way the what possibly myth goes is that like Lao Tzu was a guy who was kind of working for the government. He was like the government librarian. He kept all the records and all this stuff, and he amassed all of this knowledge through working in government, and that eventually he learned so much and he got older and he decided to retire. So he went to leave kind of the city, and then the guard or the watchman at the end of the place says, "Hey, Lao Tzu, you're leaving." He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to go off and live in the woods." And he goes, "I wanted to tell these people what I learned all this time, but nobody wanted to listen to me." And so the guy standing there at the gate said, "Oh, please tell me your wisdom." And then he sat and rattled off 81 different poems, which became the basis of Taoism. So, yeah, it's
So
it's
why do
it's interesting
so why do people think he didn't exist?
because there's no historical record of him existing. So,
yeah. I mean, I believe also that it takes. I mean, well, we also have to remember that it's very hard to prove, like in very ancient times, because especially in cases of oral tradition, because I believe with even the Buddha, there's the first biography I think we have of the Buddha dates like I don't know, like there's conservative and liberal estimates about go from anywhere to 250 to 400 years after his death.
Right.
And same with
Um,
Confucius.
yeah, so I mean, if you take that long span of time, I don't know how long it is specifically for Lao Tzu, how how that worked out with him, but
Uh,
I imagine that's a similar sort of thing.
yeah, it's hard to know. And some people believe that it was just kind of this mythos was created from the different people that were involved in this school of the Tao. And then kind of came together to create this idea, or I don't we don't really know. But I was talking to a guy who was a kind of prominent Taoist scholar who's writing a book on this, and he had it kind of nailed down to a point that he kind of knew who it was, and there's a book coming out about it, and I've said too much. But we're trying to get on the show to talk about it, but that he kind of had it. I know. I can't. He swore me to secrecy, so I can't talk about it till the book comes out. But I talked to a guy, and he kind of knows who he thinks are the type of person it might have been that posed as this what they called the wise old man of Lao Tzu.
All right, what's the name of the book?
Name of the book coming out? It doesn't have a title yet. He hasn't told me the title, but yes, it was actually. Well, I could say who it is, but I just can't say what his ideas are. There's a guy named Benjamin Hoff who wrote a book called The Tao of Pooh. In the Tao of Pooh.
Tao of Pooh or Coo?
Or Pooh. Pooh, which is like
Winnie the Pooh.
Like the way and he kind of brought Taoism to prominence in Western culture because he related the ideas to the characters of Winnie the Pooh back in 1982, and it became like a huge hit book. That's what introduced me to Taoism. So I talked to him, and he said, I'm writing a whole book on how I've kind of pinpointed who it was that was posing as Lao Tzu or writing as Lao Tzu or whatever. So hopefully that comes out because I can't wait to dig into that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, it goes back to the idea in Taoism that it doesn't really...
And did it come before or after Confucius? Or
I believe it came around the same time. And the funny thing is, it's all around the same time that Buddhism also developed. So it's almost like you had this, and then you would have, well, I don't know, this was like...
Yeah, they call it the Axial Age.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Around that time. So, I mean, whether that just means people were really coming to these ideas, evolved to this point of consciousness, or it was because people had maybe the ability to share information easier.
So it's basically the opposite of 2020.
Right. Yeah. People are devolving now. I like it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is funny how that is. I mean, I do remember it's actually funny when you go into Eastern and Western philosophies because you do realize that they share some things in common when it comes to at least the prizing of oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Like Buddhism, I think takes it up a notch when it comes to that because they really venerate that sort of thing.
Okay.
But I remember like in some Western philosophies, they they didn't just they prized oral tradition so much that they purposely forbid writing anything down because
Wow.
they felt that writing it down would somehow make it lessen it. So as a history buff myself, to me that sort of disappoints me. I would have really loved to have seen them actually write it down.
And they actually didn't start doing history until the Han Dynasty, which was then it was can't remember exactly when, but it was at least a century after the first Chinese emperor Qin Shi Huang died.
Oh wow.
Mhm.
Wow,
The
that's
great
great.
historian. I keep forgetting his name every time.
Well, and well, the funny thing is, it's kind of like these ancient people knew, like, you'll text somebody and maybe they'll miss the context of what you're saying. You know, you're like, oh no, I was joking. Whereas if it was face to face, you get it. And the funny thing is the Tao Te Ching, it opens up like the first lines is the Tao that can't be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can't be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth, and the named is the mother of the myriad things.
Yes,
So,
Sima Qian was his name. That was
okay.
that was more than half a century after.
Oh, wow. So the basic thing they're saying is that you can't put any true idea into words, and that words are kind of like a poor tool for describing things, you know, and you can only get so far. So if you just go based on the words and don't get into the greater context of it, which is very hard to communicate, then you're going to miss it. And we always joke on our show, What's This Tao All About, that we're talking about something that can't be talked about. So what we're doing is ultimately pointless. But such is life.
It's a show about nothing.
It really is. You're right. You're right.
That's basically that's the bar from Seinfeld.
Yes. Well, we often joke about with our listeners, like, you know, I think we're going to figure out what this Tao is all about on this episode. And then we never do, you know. I think one time we did, we were just talking in between shows and we got it down and then we forgot it. So, you know, that's the Taoist idea.
Maybe Avatar Last Ember.
Which is funnier because considering how you have a Taoist priest on there, so you would assume that if anyone got it, it would be him.
He gets it in his bones, you know.
I believe it's a ritualistic thing that you get it through practice as well.
Mm-hmm. And then the thing is about forgetting about it is they say like the guy who reaches the highest point of Tao isn't like, you know, a Franciscan friar and he's sitting there working it out to the day he dies. It's you get it and then you forget about it and then you move on with your life, you know, or you keep, or as Dr. Carl Totten always tells me, he says the Tao is about returning. So it's about, you kind of get away from it for a bit and then you find it again. And you go back to it. It's like Bono once said, he says, my favorite people are those running either directly towards God or directly away from God. And I think the Tao is like that, in that you understand you have this center that you can go to, and you get away from it. You have a bad weekend, you know. and then on Monday morning, you know, you go and you meditate and you read, and then you get it back in your bones and you get that feeling again. But in Taoism, the idea of, you know, being close and connected to these things is it's not forever and it's transient and it's in constant change. And also the idea of everything being in constant change is what the Tao is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is actually pretty interesting. I do know that Taoism does talk a lot about, it's very much, trying to think how to word it correctly. It's a very action approach, like ritualistic, where, you know, where it's about right practice, which is a key thing in virtue ethics as well, in general. Where, you know, it's one thing to believe something and to hold something as true, and it's another thing altogether to actually live it out.
Yeah, Taoism is all about living it out, like almost like 90%, because Taoism isn't about faith. It's not about. It's really not about. It's about understanding Tao, and understand. It's basically about saying, like, I think it's very difficult to argue against the basic Taoist principles, because they're basically about. I think everyone can agree that the universe operates in a certain way. I think everyone can believe that there is a natural way that everything works, and it's best that we go with that. The question becomes whether we should put authority on top of things and block the way things naturally work. That's where the debate is. But everyone can sit and say, there's a natural way things work. Isn't it best that I work with the natural way of the earth and the cosmos and the universe when I'm kind of walking through my daily life? So it's not really about, like in Western religion is kind of about having faith or accepting precepts, and then through accepting those and having faith, you are given kind of admission to a larger world. Tell me if I'm wrong about that, but yeah. So Taoism isn't really. It can be about faith in your understanding of the way the universe works, and maybe you'll take certain risks because you think things will go a certain way, and they either do or they don't.
I was wondering, because I do know in some Eastern religions and just some philosophies they go um, into the spiritual when it comes to things like reincarnation
Mm-hmm.
and you know and sort of seances where they talk about ancestral worship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure because I always get mixed up on it, but what does Taoism say anything like unique about the spirit in that sort of way?
It kind of it doesn't like if you go to what basically what philosophical Taoists will look at, like the Tao Te Ching, the Chuang-Tzu, and the I Ching and Li Tzu. There isn't really much about like reincarnation or what happens when you die. A lot of it is just about it's basically a returning to the source. It's a returning of your energy to everything. It's a returning of your body to nourish the ground, and there's a celebration of death. Sometimes there's a story in Chuang-Tzu about a man whose wife has died, and he sits there beating on a pot, singing and being happy. Uh, and then people are like, "Why are you doing that?" And it's like, "This is that the universe works, and it's fine, and it's time to move on. We had a
So,
good time
so
together."
sort of, instead of like a conscious afterlife, it's more like pantheistic, where you become part of the rocks and trees and birds and stuff.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Mm,
They're not completely detailed about that, and I'm sure there's religious Taoists that have a different idea about that. But if you look at just the basic text, what they say, it tends to be more of just merging with the Tao, which is what is around you and that you came from. It's just that whole cycle, and there's stuff, and then there was like there would not be life without death, and then in a certain way, life is death and death is life,
mm.
and that's kind of the if you look at uh, like if you look at a yin and yang, you have life and you have death, but really it's that combination of them together that is the Tao.
Yeah, I was wondering, does it have does like because I talked to a Buddhist and they have sort of an interesting way that they do diets.
Mm.
Does Taoism do recommend anything like that, or does it just stay like more like be modest or whatever?
Yeah, in the Tao Te Ching, there's a great passage, and I think if I can find this, I believe it's number 5 here. Oh no, I always get these wrong. I gotta memorize these. But basically, the idea is that um, the 5 colors mad in the eye, the 5 senses mad in the tongue, the 5 sounds mad in the ear. The idea is that extremes in any way are going to be bad for you. So, like, if you do nothing but eat like hot wings all the time, then eventually you're going to burn out your sense of taste. If you eat unhealthy foods all the time, you're going to be unhealthy. So it's kind of about balance. And then there's also a bit in the Tao of Pooh I love, and it talks about the Taoist understands that even if he has nothing but a bowl of rice, if he sits and completely focuses on that bowl of rice, doesn't think about anything else, doesn't think about what the rice is lacking or what the rice is, then it'll be like the most fulfilling meal he can have or he or she can have. And it's about, that kind of simplicity.
But I
There's
like
also
hot wings.
me too. No, that's why I use it as an example because that's my jam. I
Mhm.
love blazing at B Dubs.
And honey barbecue.
Oh, you're a honey barbecue guy. I don't think I've ever had the honey barbecue. I always stick
Have it with ranch dressing. Don't forget the ranch.
oh, you gotta have much better than blue cheese.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can't have it without the ranch.
That should be the next podcast where we just simply talk about hot wings. That's what
yeah.
I want to do.
That
And
that'd
and
be
shrimp fried
interesting.
rice.
And how to it'd be called Hot Wings and the Dow.
Yeah, the Tao hot wings. There's also a great a piece of classic Asian artwork, and it's the vinegar tasters. Have you guys heard about this?
No.
No, not really.
Okay, so there's a bowl of vinegar, and you have the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius, and they're all
I
standing.
think I vaguely heard about this.
Yeah, they're all standing over the vinegar, and the Buddha tastes it and says it's sour because life is suffering. And then Confucius, he eats it, and he's not into it because he says it tastes awful, whatever. And then Lao Tzu smiles and says, "Oh, it's great because the vinegar is just being vinegar, and the vinegar is a great ingredient in something much like hot wing sauce, which has a huge amount of vinegar in
Mhm. Well, hopefully none of them add baking soda to it.
it." That sounds awful.
I think I remember that story.
Yeah, but
Where did that come
that's
from?
that is. I think it's just folklore. I think it's not. It's not in the Tao Te Ching. I know.
Well, obviously, they probably wouldn't have known each other.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there is like an apocryphal story, I guess, where Confucius met Lao Tzu and said, "I just met a dragon," is what he said.
Ah.
But and then there's also in
Oh yeah, and
in the
there's this one book in the '80s written by Gore Vidal. It's called Creation, where the protagonist is in the court of Xerxes and during the Persian Empire, and he travels all over the Orient during the Axial Age, and he meets Buddha, Confucius, and all these other great influential figures of that around the same time.
Oh wow, oh that sounds awesome. That Gore Vidal, what's that called again? By Gore Vidal?
Creation, I think.
Ah,
Mhm.
I remember I saw I was listening to an interview with Gore Vidal, and it was towards the end of his days, and when he was kind of not the most lucid being on the planet, and
He was a
and someone asked him, the interview asked him and said, "Are you a socialist?" And he paused and he says, "I'm a bisexual." It was hilarious. I was like, "That's like the funniest thing I've ever heard." I don't know whether it was he was being conscious of that or he was just totally out of it, but I was like, "That's the greatest answer to any question." Is I'm a bisexual. I don't know. What is it?
Mhm.
He was an anti-religious nut job, I think.
Yeah, I think he was a pretty strident atheist.
Mhm. Yeah. So I found that.
This was probably written back when he was more appreciative of stuff. I
Huh.
don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I was thinking about. So have there always been sort of competition between the Confucian and Taoist sects, or is it, you know, is there some attempts to merge the two, or is it, they're just sort of their own separate things?
I don't know. I think that you probably have to ask somebody who lives in China who is really familiar with the history of China to go over that. Especially because Taoism evolved into kind of like a folkloric religion in China that would kind of make things a little bit different of a discussion. But I think they're two value systems that are just deeply ingrained in kind of the marrow of that part of the world. And so that I don't know, but I like when we're talking about Taoism on my show or when I'm just thinking about it, I like to think about the basic ideas of authoritarianism versus decentralization and how people can live in life. And I think that's one of the most powerful kind of lessons to take from it is does one believe that uh, the world is such that man can get along living free without being kind of told what to do by religion, by by political leaders, all this. Do you believe that the world works in such a natural way that all of that is unnecessary, and that man should be left alone to kind of be free and kind of live his own way? And I think that the Confucian versus Taoism argument, I think, is a great exemplary of that.
Mhm.
And that kind of gets into the political aspects of the Tao Te Ching and everything. But
Mhm.
yeah, the Confucians are like the good bad guys to beat up on in a conversation about this type of philosophy, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, it does sound like that. Uh, yeah, I from what you said, I see it sort of as like a if we're going politics, I see like Confucianism being the more conservative and the more wanting to like litigate the rules, while the Taoism is more libertarian
Hmm.
in its philosophy.
Yeah, it's kind of more anarchist. Well, the thing is, if I say libertarian on my podcast, I get an angry email. So I'll say, I'll say anarchist, and then anarchist is okay. But
And
Alright.
'cause they're kind of libertarianism and anarchism kind of they're kind of close, like in ideas. And I think people have a weird association with libertarianism, but anarchism I think they're okay with, unless people are a libertarian.
and
But
Confucianism is more behavior based, and Buddhism is more like spiritual agnosticism. So, what would that make Taoism in comparison?
that's a good question. I think it would be uh, definitely kind of an agnostic slash atheist, and it's more, I would say, experiential, because the experience of understanding the way the world works around you then leads to the behavior versus behavior first.
Mhm.
It's more of a reacting to what's around you and then cultivating whatever's inside you to act uh, with what's around you.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I believe temperance and modesty is more of a thing in Taoism than I think in Western philosophies that more focus on prudence.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that kind of Western philosophy, I think, tends to be based on individualism.
Mhm.
There's a lot of that in there. It's man's relationship to Christ, or if you look at most Western European and America, it tends to be kind of an individualist society. Um, but then, but the weird thing is the Taoist idea is individualist, but it's almost like a more collectivist way of looking at the world. Could you rephrase your question again? I'm trying to get it right, get the answer right.
Um, yeah, I believe it was your question, Carlos.
What would that make? What would it make Taoism in comparison to Buddhism being more spiritual agnosticism and Confucianism being behaviorally based?
Okay, yeah, oh yeah, I got that one.
I think he's more going over like, what would you say is more like the differences in the ethics and spirituality base?
Oh, versus like a Western concept.
I mean, you
I
can go into that too, but you can go mainly between the three that he brought up.
Yeah, I mean, if like the idea between the ethics, I don't know that much about Buddhist ethics, to be honest with you, but when it comes to kind of Western ethics, I think Western ethics tend to be a little bit more based on this is good, this is bad, this is evil, this is like the idea that, and I think in Western ethics, there's like a hard set, there is evil in the world, right? There's an understanding of that. And I think Taoism is not quite as hard set on the idea that there is abject evil. There can be unfortunate things, and there can be things that go against the Tao, things that violate naturalness, and there can be, you know, wrong, wrong-minded violence, things like that. Uh, but I don't think they see things as evil for being purely evil, because there isn't really a concept of like God and the devil, or like the devil is evil, God is good. Um, so I think it's a little more nebulous.
But there is light and darkness, which can vaguely point to that to certain people.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Oh, of course, 100%. It's just I wouldn't say it's as hard set as we know this XYZ thing is pure evil, right? Versus that. So it's not as hard set, I would say.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I know in Buddhist ethics, a lot of Buddhist ethics, since you said you weren't familiar with it, um, in Buddhist ethics, it's more, not directly causing harm is their big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
which it leads to some funny, what I call sort of funny results from that,
Mhm.
because, like in Buddhism, they would say it's strictly forbidden to kill an animal.
Mhm.
Like, but however, veget veganism and vegetarianism is not a mandate. I always wondered how they got around that, and I learned how they get around that is that while it's immoral to kill the animal, there's a gray area where if you find an animal dead in the woods, then that's fine. You can eat it.
Yeah, there's a sect called the Roadkill Buddhists,
Mhm.
and it's a joke. But yeah, yeah, that makes sense because the whole thing is not about suffering. Um, Taoism, there really isn't a prescription on whether one can eat meat or not. I studied before at a Taoist temple, and they did always serve only vegetarian foods, and we're all about you know all about that.
I think that could also be a cultural thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, we had on our show somebody asked about that, and I was like, I don't know the answer. Like, just personally, I eat meat, but I'm a guilty meat eater. I think that probably best. You can eat healthy without eating meat and probably get on with life. But personally, I eat meat, and I'm a guilty meat eater. But and somebody asked about veganism on our podcast, and Dr. Totten said that Taoists believe in the circle of life and all this. So then we get a lot of angry emails about that. We get a
Thing
lot of
is,
people.
it's basically like the Lion King thing. It's the circle of life.
Yeah, that's how Dr. Totten described it, and so I don't know. I don't. It's hard to tell that.
like at the beginning, they would have their all these animals in the kingdom worshiping the like bowing down to the baby Simba when he's shown like like this is your food. Your food is worshiping you.
Yeah,
Like you know how jarring that is.
yeah, yeah. It's like me walking into the produce aisle of Stater Brothers, and all the carrots stand up and salute.
Yeah, I know. It's really funny that I mean, and when they actually go over that a little bit in the film where they say, it's the circle of life. We eat animals, we die, and the plants eat us. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
so so they says it all comes back around, which I found funny because that is sort of like a Taoist thing.
Oh,
And
definitely. Yeah,
that's the Achilles heel of veganism.
yeah. So, yeah, that's the yeah, that's kind of that's what I've been told the way Taoists look at it. But I don't know. Everybody can have their own opinion, and don't send me an angry email about it, regardless if you have any opinion on it. I
Yeah,
don't care.
yeah. So I've always thought that is pretty interesting. I've always found that. Uh, so trying to think. What would you say? What would damn it? Let me get this straight. What would you say is some of the favorite shows that you've had? Like your favorite guest?
uh, I think the best shows we've had are ones where you set out to talk about a topic and you end up being able to really unpack it and get deep into it to the point to where you're learning about it as you talk about it. It's almost like not like specific episodes, but ones that just went in directions I wouldn't assume, and ones that I learned a whole bunch from Dr. Totten on, or episodes where somebody had a question, I thought I had the answer to it, and then Dr. Totten, just because he's the man's so brilliant that he just like lapped me intellectually on it. I always love those because it's always like it's always great when you have your own assumptions about reality and you go in and you realize that you're totally wrong. If you could be open to being wrong and accepting it and learning from it, I think those are the most exciting shows to me. Um, but anybody who's into Taoism, I think they'll find our show interesting because we do really kind of go deep into things. And we've got like 76 hours, or 76 episodes of us talking about everything. And Yeah, and I think it's my favorite shows are the ones where we can take these ideas and translate them into everyday life. Because, when Lao Tzu, if he existed, was walking around China, he wasn't thinking when he wrote those ideas down that they're just for Chinese people, or that they're just for people of that era. He saw them as kind of eternal, and so if people can, if the average guy can apply those to their life, it can be valuable. So that's that's why we did the show the way we did it, because I don't want to talk to like a bunch of intellectuals. I don't want to talk to a bunch of academics. I want the average person that wants to lead a happy life and to listen to our show and to hopefully get something about it, because I was able to record this brilliant man that's on the other end of the microphone from me, and that's why I do it.
All right. So, yeah, I've liked the most recent show I believe you had was where you talked to a physicist
Yeah.
who talked about physics and the Tao.
Mm-hmm.
I found that very interesting because that went into what she was, I think, going into quantum mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
which I've always found funny because that is really I think many Eastern more Eastern philosophy people are really getting into the quantum mechanics and stuff like that.
Yeah, she brought up a book called The Tao of Physics, which is kind of a book that people often come to Taoism through reading. And her name was Jane English. Now, her importance is that she did the photographs for the most popular translation of the Tao Te Ching with her late husband, Gi Fu Fang, or Jia Fu Fang. And so the funny thing is she was a physicist, she was a photographer, and she wasn't really into Taoism until she understood its connection with physics. And then she had this psychedelic experience while stone cold sober of realizing how how Lao Tzu or whomever back in the day had such a deep understanding of the way the world works that later physicists are talking about similar things in their description of Tao and their description of the way the universe works. And that gets back to what we were talking about earlier about like the theory of everything. So she was a great interview because she used to, her and her husband Jafu was very close friends with Alan Watts, which anybody who's into Eastern philosophy is probably into Alan Watts, who was at the beginning of the kind of the psychedelic movement with Ram Dass and that crowd coming out of Berkeley in like the 60s in San Francisco. And so, yeah, she was there for all that. So we got to talk with her recently, and she was just a force of nature, just a total blast.
Yeah, I do remember, I just liked the conversation. I thought it was very interesting. I remember it was funny because you were sort of, like you had said, you felt like you were sort of out of your depth on that.
Yes. I'm sitting there with a physicist and a doctor, and it's just me with my bachelor's degree from Cal State Long Beach in communications that just got into radio because he worked for the radio station that had Howard Stern on it in Los Angeles, and now it's all this, so yeah. But I think the thing is hopefully to be humble, to be humble enough and be like, I'm just here to hopefully bring out what Dr. Totten has and get it recorded for posterity for the world to enjoy. And so if I succeed at that and I drain him of everything that he knows, then I've done my job and help people out, because it's incredible that there's a lot of people that have existed and they never were able to tell everybody everything. So hopefully I can get everything out of Dr. Todd. So
all right, so we're up the hour mark. I would like, can you tell the audience where they can find you and your work?
yes, you can find it at what's this Tao all about. It's what'sthisDao.com. What's this Tao all about on Spotify, iTunes. I think we're still on Google Plus, if that's still a thing. Stitcher, and you can listen to our shows. And then also we're on Patreon, where we just launched another show called The 10,000 Things, which is Dr. Totten sharing his knowledge on a whole host of other subjects that we touch on our show, but our show is specifically about Taoism, and that's pretty much all we talk about. So if we get off topic, we'll talk about something else for a second that we think is important, but then now we put this on What's This Tao on Patreon. So people can go to Patreon, What's This Tao All About, and they can subscribe, and for $6 you'll get some shows. We just recently talked about a book by Eric Fromm called Escape from Freedom, which is about whether man is subject to be a subject to authority or like a lemming, or whether man is actually a free thinking individual. And so that was a great episode that Dr. Totten shared his wisdom on that. And then also we have some other fun stuff coming up on that. So, but yeah, or follow us on Twitter at is it at What's This Tao on Twitter. And my name is Todd Perry, and you can find me on Twitter at Todd A. Perry. That's TODAPERRY. And you can follow everything we're doing.
That's nice. Well, it was nice talking to you, Todd.
Thank you.
I tell everyone, make sure to check out your show. It was very nice getting to know a little bit about the Eastern philosophies.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do this again sometime, maybe with the doctor on as well.
Oh yeah, I tell you this, that right now you just talked to Robin, and you're missing out on Batman. But hopefully I did okay.
You did good.
Hopefully I represented the team okay. It's kind of like you didn't have the Joker running around that need to be caught by Batman, but maybe like just a bank robber that Robin can get.
No Catwoman though.
No Catwoman. Well, which Catwoman? That's the next episode. Is Michelle Pfeiffer or Halle Berry?
All right. Well, it was nice talking to you. Do you got any final things you want to say, Carlos?
Who's Carlos?
The same thing as the Tao.
No, just go follow him and see you next time.
All right. Thank you very much.